Everyone, welcome to the explanation. So in last video I talked about types of lock. So we talked about what is a write lock and what is a read lock. So read lock, it was a lock using which more than one transaction can share a data. So in that we were only able to read the data, and otherwise the write lock, so if any transaction, if any data has a write lock, it means that no other transaction is able to access the data. Okay, so these were the two types of locks that we discussed yesterday. So in today's video I'll be talking about types of lock based protocol. Okay, so this is again one of the most important topic for your exam, and one question is most from this topic. So in types of lock based protocol, we have got a number of protocol. The first one is being the simplistic lock protocol. Okay, simplistic lock protocol. So in what happens in simplistic lock protocol, so I have divided this into a number of steps, we can say. First step in this is exclusive lock only. Okay, so what happens in this a transaction acquire which lock? It is exclusive lock, we can say, or it is also called write lock on the data they want to modify. It means that in first step what happens is, if any transaction, if suppose this is our data, and if any transaction wants to modify the data, it is going to acquire the exclusive lock. Okay, and once this transaction holds this exclusive lock, no other transaction can come and read or write the data. Okay, so until the lock is not released, no other transaction can come and access this data. Second step for this is lock acquisition. Okay, lock acquisition, it means that suppose this transaction wants to access the data, so the first of all it request for lock. Okay, it means that it requests to use this data. If this data is available, if no other transaction is using this data, it is going to acquire the lock. But if any other transaction is using this data, if already this data has a lock, so this transaction must wait until the lock is released. Okay, and the third step is lock release. Okay, so what happens in this once the transaction T1 has updated this data or used this data, it needs to release the lock. So here what we can write is exclusive lock is released once the transaction commit. Okay, or we can say even if it aborts. Once the transaction is completed, this lock should be released. So this is called lock release. So you can remember this in simplistic lock protocol. It works in obtaining the lock, okay, and using the lock and then releasing the lock. Okay, so this is the first type, that is simplistic lock protocol. Now let's go and talk about the second type of protocol, which is pre-claiming. CLAIMING, pre-claiming lock protocol. So you can see, as the name is telling you, it's pre-claiming. It means that before a transaction begins, it pre-claims, or we can also say pre-acquire, ACQUIRE, acquire the lock on all data it may need during transaction. Okay, so here see the difference. Okay, so name itself is telling it's a pre-claiming. It means that suppose it is a transaction T1 and suppose it needs to use this data, two data, X1, X and Y. So what happens is before the transaction begins, before the transaction starts, it is going to acquire lock on both of these data. Okay, that's why it is called pre-claiming lock. Okay, so here again we can divide this in a number of steps. First step is transaction initiation. Okay, so about this I have already talked. Transaction initiation means it is going to pre-acquire all the data, pre-lock all the data. Second one is lock acquisition, QUISITION. Okay, so here it acquires the lock. It means that whatever lock it needed, it is going to acquire the lock. So here it can use both locks, that is shared lock, which is used only for reading, and exclusive lock, which is used for updation also. Depending on the need, it can acquire any lock, either shared lock or exclusive lock. So in this phase it is going to acquire all the lock, and in third C phase it is execution phase. Okay, so here without any overhead, without any tension, it is going to execute the transaction, like whatever changes it wants to do, it is going to execute the transaction in this phase. And finally, after updating the data or whatever transaction it wants to do, it is going to lock release. It means that it is going to release the lock so that other transaction can come and use the data. Okay, so this can be represented in the form of a diagram. So let me draw a diagram for you. So suppose this is our transaction. So this is our transaction. So here our transaction begin and here our transaction end, and if this is your time. Okay, and here you can see this, in this phase our lock is attained, and this phase our lock is released, and here it is the execution phase. Okay, so this is a diagram of a simplistic pre-claiming based protocol. Now let us talk about one of the most important, and this question is singly asked. You can say that this question is very important. Third type of protocol, which is two-phase locking. It is also known as 2PL protocol. Okay, so this 2PL is a well-known concurrency control protocol used in DBMS. And why it is used? It is used to ensure the serializability. Okay, so in this protocol what we see is, we see how a lock is acquired and how it is released. So we have two phases of 2PL. We have got two phases of this protocol. First is known as the growing phase, or here we can say it is also lock acquisition phase. Okay, so you can guess what is this. So here what happens is, every transaction, whoever wants to use any type of data, it is going to acquire the lock on data. In this phase they can only acquire the lock. They cannot release the lock in this phase. Release the lock. Okay, and what type of lock can it can acquire? It can acquire both lock. That is shared lock as well as write lock. Okay, and once this phase it acquires the lock, it uses the data, it changes the data, it is going to release the lock. So in releasing the lock, we go to the second phase of this, that is the B number phase, which is shrinking phase. Okay, so what happens in shrinking phase? In shrinking phase, transaction starts to release the lock, and if the transaction is in shrinking phase, it cannot acquire any new lock, Okay, so here the lock is attained, the lock is growing phase, and there is a shrinking phase, we can say. So again, this can be shown, we can show this in a graph form, we can say. So here we can say this is the number of lock, and this is the duration or time we can say. So here the transaction begins, and then here the transaction, okay, and this can be shown in a down arrow. Okay, so what happens, this up arrow, it denotes obtaining a lock, and down arrow, it denotes the releasing of lock. Okay, and this can be shown as the lock point. Okay, here the transaction begin and here the transaction ends. So what can you tell? This is our growing phase and this is our shrinking phase. Okay, fine. So let's go to the fourth type of lock protocol we can say, which is strict two-phase lock we can say. Okay, so strict two-phase lock, as the name said, it is a variant of two-phase lock protocol. So initial phase is same only. Here in initial phase it resembles same as, let me write, initial phase is same as 2PL. Okay, and what happens during this phase? Transaction acquire all locks initially, we can say initially, and proceed their operation, okay, without releasing any lock prematurely. It means that the time the transaction has not been completed, it is not going to release the lock. Okay, so here what is the difference? You can say me, what is the difference between 2PL and strict 2PL? So what happened in strict 2PL? It is going to retain each lock until the transaction commit. Okay, so what was happening in 2PL? In 2PL, after using the data, we used to release the lock. But in strict two-phase protocol, what happens is we are not going to release the data after the completion, but after the commitment we are going to release the data. Okay, so what happens here? If you release the lock and if for some reason you cannot commit, so you will go to the inconsistency problem. But in a strict two-phase lock protocol, what happens is we are not going to release the data until and unless we commit the transaction. It means that we are not going to face the inconsistency problem here. Okay, so this is the strict two-phase lock protocol. So that was all about the lock based protocol, which is a very important topic for exam. In next video I'll be coming with deadlock. So till then, stay safe and thank you.